As you watch the following video, fill in your argument notes note taker. First, let's define what is an argument. An argument is a set of statements, each supporting the others, that presents a position or viewpoint on a particular topic. An effective argument always has the following elements. You need an introduction paragraph, several supporting body paragraphs, as well as a counter-argument paragraph. Finally, a conclusion paragraph. We'll start with the introduction paragraph. The first 1 to 2 sentences of your essay is called the hook. This needs to grab the reader's attention, and it really establishes a connection between the writer and the reader. It could be a story, it could be a type of descriptive image, it could be a definition of an important term, it could be a startling statement, or a related famous quote. Here's an example of a startling statement. Roughly 16,272 murders were committed in the United States during 2008. Of these, about 10,886, or 67%, were committed using a gun. This statement grabs the reader's attention because it's a pretty large percentage of murders that were committed using firearms. Next, in your introduction paragraph, you need to be certain to include background information. 1 to 3 sentences will suffice, and these sentences should set the stage and provide context for the reader to understand what the argument will be about. You don't want to give away too much information or get into any specific facts. Just give the reader a general idea about what the essay will be about. For example, legislators have argued for decades over the best ways to prevent gun violence. Some laws have been enacted to ensure that these weapons stay out of the hands of those who are mentally ill or have a history of violent crimes, but there is still work to be done. Lastly, in your introduction paragraph, be sure to include a clear thesis statement. This should be the last sentence of your intro, and it should state your belief in what you wish to argue. This should be something that can be proven with evidence that will come later in your essay. And it's very critical that you don't use first or second person in your thesis statement or at any point in argumentative writing. So instead of saying something like, "I believe there should be a more regulated system to control who buys and sells guns to prevent mass shootings," simply say, "There should be a more regulated system to control who buys and sells guns and to prevent mass shootings." This is what your introduction paragraph might look like. You have your hook, a startling statement, then you have a couple sentences of background information, and lastly, the final sentence is a clear thesis statement that can be proven with evidence. Next, you need several supporting body paragraphs. These should be written as C-sets. The claims should support your thesis statement. And then evidence in those paragraphs, such as data, quotes, or even stories, should support your claims. Here's an example for the essay about gun control. One way that we can fix our current gun problem is by having mandatory mental health screenings for every citizen who has purchased or will purchase a gun. For example, under federal law, an individual is prohibited from buying or possessing firearms if they have been adjudicated as a mental defective or committed to a mental institution. Mandatory mental health screenings are quick and inexpensive, and they could potentially save hundreds of lives. Notice that in this supporting paragraph, we have a clearly stated claim, facts that support that claim, and ultimately, this paragraph supports the thesis statement that we need to have a more regulated system to control who buys and sells guns. After your supporting body paragraphs, you want to be sure to include a counter-argument paragraph. This recognizes the arguments made by the other side and should be written as a C-set-set-C paragraph. We'll talk more specifically about each part of the counterargument, but the concession makes up the C set, and the refutation makes up the set C. Total, the C set C makes a counterargument paragraph. Let's start with the concession. The concession shows that the other side is somewhat valid. So let's say we're talking about gun control. You might want to start your paragraph, a counterargument paragraph, with something like, some might argue that gun restrictions are already too harsh and any more would violate the Second Amendment. As previously mentioned, the concession should be a C-set paragraph and include a piece of evidence that supports an opposing viewpoint of your thesis. Use a phrase such as some might argue or those on the other side of this argument might say at the beginning of the paragraph to show the reader that this is your counterargument. Next, in the same paragraph, you add a set C that acts as your refutation. So following the concession, the refutation argues against that opposing viewpoint that you just presented to show that your side is actually more valid or more true. It explains why the concession is actually wrong. Use a transition word in your setup of the set C, such as however or nevertheless, to indicate a shift back to your original argument. The refutation should be a set C and include a piece of evidence that proves the evidence in the concession to be wrong or flawed. Altogether, you have your counterargument paragraph. Here's a good example of a counterargument paragraph. Notice the text in green. That's the concession. That's an alternative point of view. It's the other side of the argument. Then in red, you have the refutation. This proves the concession wrong and makes your argument stronger. Let's take a look. Some might argue that iPads actually have a negative impact on education. iPads could introduce yet another distraction for students in the classroom. According to Galgano, school-approved devices that give students free rein over the internet open the door to dangerous or distracting websites and apps, such as social media. Galgano, 2014, page 49. That's your in-text citation. Especially for young people who lack self-control, the existence of distracting apps on iPads suggests that they could negatively affect student learning. However, research shows that iPads can actually improve students' ability to focus on a particular task. Galgano reveals, schools can easily monitor and control student access on iPads using apps such as Casper, which locks students into an application of the teacher's choosing. Again, notice the in-text citation. In fact, this technology is improving education because it gives teachers a new and easier way to focus student attention. Even though it seems that iPads could distract, teachers can easily control how students use this technology, which benefits both students and teachers. Something to notice about this counterargument example, it's the C-set paragraph as it should be. The conclusion sentence sort of summarizes both points. So notice how it starts with even though. Even though the other side says this, our point is actually more valid. That's something you want the conclusion sentence in your counterargument C-set C to do. Moving on to the conclusion. The conclusion paragraph is kind of like a reverse of your introduction paragraph. You want to start by restating your thesis in a different way. Here's an example. Our nation is in desperate need of new gun laws to protect the lives of innocent people. Next, you want to summarize your claims. So this is almost kind of like the background information in your introduction paragraph. Don't repeat any information, but kind of sum up the argument with a few final facts and appeals. Appeals means you want to appeal to the audience and get them to agree with you. Here's an example. There are many ways to regulate the sale of guns. While no extreme idea is necessarily the right way, measures can be put into place to avoid catastrophes like Sandy Hook from happening again. Lastly, in your conclusion paragraph, you need a call to action. In the call to action, you challenge your reader to change his or her mindset or to take an action of some sort. For example, write a letter to your state office asking for gun safety and sale laws to be reviewed. Fight for the safety of your children and loved ones in public and private places. Here's what your completed conclusion paragraph might look like. Notice at the beginning you have the restated thesis statement, several sentences to summarize the argument, and finally, a call to action. You want your reader to be motivated to do something about what you've written about, or to have a changed mindset. Ultimately, that's your goal, to persuade the reader in some way.